Thanks everybody so much for joining today. My name is John Oungst. I'm a professional route setter currently based out of Austin, Texas. I've been setting for about 15 years now, both commercially and competitively. In my current role, I work for the Kaya Climb team, dealing with customer service for all of our gyms. Super psyched that we're doing this today. This is definitely a first for me. I've never done a completely digital webinar like this before, so hopefully it goes well. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. So what the heck is Kaya? If you haven't heard of us before, we're a team of climbers based out of the United States, and we're developing two apps for the climbing industry. One of them is Plastic, the other is Kaya. Plastic is a web-based app for route setting teams and gym operators that you can use to track and run your route setting program. In Plastic, you can manage your grade distribution, you can generate setting reports for your team, and more. And then Kaya on the other side is a climbers app. And through Kaya, you can connect to your gym and your community. You can log your climbing sessions on Kaya. We have lots of challenges that you'll be able to compete in and more. So two different things, one for the front end of the industry and then one for the back end. Both Kaya and Plastic are free, whether you're a climber looking to track your climbing session or you're a route setting team looking to take your route setting to the next level. If you're interested in learning more about Kaya and what we do, you can go to www.kayaclimb.com. This is our first episode of Kaya Sessions. This has been a very interesting and unique time for all of us with the coronavirus. A lot of us are stuck at home. We're itching to get out and go climbing. We miss those conversations that we're having. And we wanted to provide some sort of space to share, interesting discussion with industry professionals and thought leaders. One of those people who certainly inspires us quite a bit is Tonde Katiyo. We're super psyched to have him today for this first session. Tonde has been an advisor to the Kaya team for quite some time now. And for me personally, I've been fortunate enough to work with him in the past. We're also joined today by an incredibly talented panel featuring Carrie Cooper, Natasha Barnes, and Justen Sjong. You guys will meet them here in a little bit. I will be moderating for today to the best of my ability, and we're going to get started here in just a second. A little bit of a rundown for how this is going to work. Tonde is going to give us a quick presentation. We're going to go into a discussion with the panelists, and then we'll finish with that Q&A that I mentioned before. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it off to Tonde to allow him to introduce himself.
Am I live?
You are live, sir.
Great. Thank you, John. Thanks for the great presentation. Yeah, so my introduction is pretty simple. My name is Tonde. I am a route setter and have been for 20 some years. I'm really passionate about it. Currently, I am the director of route setting at the Bouldering Project in the United States. And I am, French by nationality. I have 2 kids, and I am excited to be here. Thanks for having me, John. So I am going to jump straight into this presentation. So technicalities, I will start with sharing my screen over here. And here, all right. Can you give me a thumbs up, John, if that is working? Okay, great. I'm just gonna do this, and we should be off. So, athletic empathy. So first of all, I want to say that athletic empathy is mostly the formalization of something that I think route setters, particularly good route setters, have been doing for many years. I think intuitively, people have, sorry, little technical problem here. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay. I think good route setters have already had this skill, but I felt over the years that I needed to formalize it a little bit more. In particular, because I spent a lot of time teaching route setting and trying to explain to people how to set better boulders, how to be more efficient, how to connect the climbing with the setting with the climbers in their communities and in their climbing gyms. And I found that it was, I had to go further than just the feelings that I had, and I wanted words and sort of ideas and process to explain it. What helped me in doing that was design thinking, because I was a graphic designer in my previous profession. And design thinking was attractive to me because it was very similar to the process I had already. Essentially, it's a process to help you be creative in a group, and to organize the work to be efficient and organized in terms of when you do creative parts, when do you do more efficient production aspects, and how you communicate to get to a good result. And design thinking helped me at least organize my thoughts in my work as a route setter. And the four of the steps were already quite similar: finding a pattern or a style or an idea, from that style creating a boulder, setting it on the wall, and then testing it. Were all really close, but for sure the part that I felt was missing was this first step: learning from climbing and empathizing. My starting point was always very personal. This is what I want. This is what I think is cool. And so doing a better job at evaluating, looking at what is happening in the gym or in the competition, and trying to build my ideas from that as a route. I did simple things like looking in the dictionary. It's something I do on a regular basis, looking up words to make sure I really understand them. And in this case, I'm glad I did, because I was missing the end part of this definition from within the other being's frame of reference. And it really is important because, if you had asked me, I would have said, yeah, empathy is like feeling what somebody else is feeling, and, not thought about it much more than that. But the truth is, for me to imagine the emotions or the experience of anything, being complimented or being insulted, as a woman being a man, or as an old man being a younger man, or as a child, it's all different because that's not exactly what my frame of reference is. And I definitely felt I wasn't doing enough with regards to the people I was setting for, to comparing what needed to happen. So two main things helped me to structure and organize my thoughts around athletic empathy. The first is setting in competitions. And competitions, sort of create a lot of intensity around a lot of things. And because they do, I think that's why competitions are such great environments to learn about ourselves. Whether you're an athlete, I think it's true, but I think it's also very true for the route setting team. Like your skills are tested, your ability to assess, and so my experience setting in competitions, I learned about first of all myself, because I was a very bad competitor. I did poorly in them. I was stressed about it. My climbing performance was much lower in competitions. As soon as there was a crowd, my stress levels would just, go through the roof, and my ability to climb would drop. So my competition experience overall was quite negative. But at the same time, I was watching and working for these athletes who were doing incredible things. And I grew to really admire and respect their ability and their willingness to expose themselves to failure on a stage in front of a judge, to try hard and, to accept the vulnerability of, 4 people just flashed this boulder and I can't even get off the ground on it. And I was really impressed and amazed by, that effort. And particularly when I was setting World Cups, there was, meaningful moments where I realized what it means to finish 21st in a qualifying round. So 21st is the first position who's not selected for semifinals, because 20 people go through. And when you're that 21st person and you have been training for a year or a year and a half, you worked really hard to qualify for your national team, you saved up money, you flew to this competition with hopes and dreams. It's so much effort. Then just you come short of it by maybe one attempt, or one mistake, and I sort of grew to understand and appreciate the experience of competing and climbing in competitions from a really different perspective than my own. And that really helped me shape my ideas. The second idea that helped me sort of understand athletic empathy was watching a person acquire a new motor skill, and that person was my daughter. Between the ages of 1.5 and 2, I watched her, go through the natural phases that, human beings go through to learn how to walk. So first sitting up, from being a floppy, little ball of cuddles, to being able to sit up, to being able to stand up holding an object or leaning against the wall, to taking her first step to gleeful parents. And then, some weeks or months later, she can walk. She has the ability to walk across a room, but then occasionally she would just fall and smash her face or bang herself. And I couldn't understand why. I'm like, you've been doing this for weeks just fine. It's the same room. Why are you falling? And when I started to pay more attention, I realized that the experience of walking was really quite different for her. First of all, the context, it was a very new skill. For me, it was something I'd been doing for years. And I took for granted, like, oh, she can walk now, so that's it. No, she's been walking for a very short amount of time. Another really interesting aspect is her anatomy is very different. She's got these chubby little legs. She's got a big diaper wrapped around her legs, so it's already quite awkward. It's a really funny thing if you have a child of that age in the environment around you. Ask them to try and clasp their hands above their head or touch their hands above their heads. And you'll see that they can barely do it because the ratio of their arms to their legs, to their head is so big that, and so the balance that exists in their body is extremely different. And so all of these things led me to realize that, if there was a pebble, if there was an extension cord, if there was a rug, a small, tiny little thing that to me wasn't an obstacle, was an obstacle to her in her context and her situation. So I have a little video here of her in that era. And so you can kind of see what I'm talking about, her lack of skill. And yes, I am laughing at her. Her lack of ability to be very stable and controlled compared to, my steps next to her, which are very mastered and comfortable. You can see how, balance is still an issue. She tips one side or the other. Her arms flop around. Her head is like leading her. And there's a slight slope in the road that is, kind of pushing her along. And if there's any little incident, any pebble that's in the wrong space or a trip, she tips over. She falls because she can't, she doesn't know how to control those muscles and that balance yet. And here's that little incident again in slow motion. If you watch her feet, the right foot, there's the little incident, just a tiny little trip. And you see how her body just flops around and doesn't know what to do to save this, this situation, and ends with this little bail and this very cute little fall. And it's all very endearing and cute and engaging, but to really put yourself in her position and to understand what is challenging for her is the exercise of athletic empathy, is to be like, what are her physical capacities what is, what is difficult for her, what is challenging, what is fun, and really trying to include the idea of performance and ability from within the frame of reference of that climber or the athlete, depending on the situation, especially because we are the person creating that playing field. And so here's some footage from, oh boy, that's loud, from some forerunning that I did for a competition in Montreal a few years ago. And, forerunning is essentially like this. You're climbing a boulder you've climbed for hours in the middle of a construction site. There's a lot of, the light is kind of uninteresting. It's a warehouse, there's ladders, there's other things going on. This is a boulder that I set, so I'm really comfortable on it. And I'm asking myself these questions. Is it too hard? Is it too easy? How is this going to feel? And if I stop at just the movement, I ignore the reality of, what it is to be in a finals, the qualification, the stress, the audience, the learning of a move, the dealing with failure. And, all those things have an influence and an impact on the process of trying to evaluate how difficult something is, what it's going to feel to another person, and the excitement and energy and satisfaction that you can get from, the success in this situation. And I feel like it's important to account for more than just the movement and how physically hard something is, or I think the full range of the experience has to be factored in to really be able to make the right adjustments and get the experience that we intended as a route setter. So I just want to talk as I explain the theory and the idea and the history behind how this idea came together. Also how I apply and implement it in the climbing environments that I work in, be they competitive or the gym. So first of all, there's this idea of observing as an expert. And route setters, the way we watch and the way we look at things, I confess in the past, it was just a way to confirm that my idea was working. Like, is my boulder doing the thing that I wanted it to do? And really, in a way, it's the wrong question. It's, I set up this situation and how can I, what is happening? What did that produce? How did that make something interesting? And how is it affecting negatively or positively either the progress of the climber or the show that it's creating? And when I started looking, what I saw is in the gym that the audience there, the audience that I had seen in competitions, I could, I had a crowd. We were the crowd, we the climbers, and the interactions that occurred between us around these climbing structures that, for me as a route setter, a climber of many years, a climbing gym like this is very familiar and comfortable, but lots of people who are in there were beginners, and it's very intimidating to be even a few feet off the ground, something I maybe didn't think about enough. Down climbing is very challenging for most people. Actually, technically, down climbing is harder than climbing up. And yeah, that can lead to quite negative experiences for some people if we don't think about, those details. I saw a lot of emotions in these environments that people were experiencing when I paid attention. I saw, encouragement, exhilaration, intimidation, lots of positive and negative things that were all mixed and layered together, creating a really complicated field of play. But at the same time, that were I had some influence on, or some effect on. And another thing I saw as I was zooming out was myself, my role in creating this playing field, because route setting, the climbing environment, in climbing gyms and competitions, we have so much influence as setters. And yeah, I just wanted to have a more positive and thoughtful process, and wanted my work to be more intentional, to yeah, bring positive things into climbing environments. And forerunning is the second area in which there's the most, I think, potential to apply athletic empathy. And it happens through the conversations that we have, that I will climb something and give my feedback on it, and then try and imagine and project what it's going to be like for the given group I'm setting for. So it could be gym community at large. Is this going to be good or fun or interesting, or are they going to learn something? And is that desirable? And trying to base it not solely on my own experience. This boulder could feel very easy to me because it's in my skill set, because I'm a stronger climber, but it's valuable to the community because it's not going to be easy for them, because I watch them climb and I know they're not able to do these things. And yeah, just understanding the difference between all the people and all the players, and that I can't expect route setting to just be the process of finding joy and a certain feeling in a boulder and then expecting everybody to find the same thing. It's somewhat unrealistic. And then the process I went through, over the years to refine this, is to create stories around people and climbing. And I have examples of people, so characters I can create and illustrate for you. This, for example, could be Sophie, not her real name and not her real picture, though this story is based on a real person, who discovered late in her 20s that she was gay. She had an attraction to a different gender, and it was a very difficult process because it happened later in her life. And she was a climber at my gym, and I was a young, very passionate climber, and my obsession was lead climbing and climbing in the big overhangs and pushing a grade every week if I could, and just like all my life was bent towards this goal of progressing climbing and climbing like in the magazines and going to all the climbing areas. And all she was interested in was top roping, and at a very moderate grade. She wasn't interested in trying anything harder. And I looked down on her. I was like, she's not a real climber. Like, she just wants to be a gym climber. And I think that was wrong. Climbing, actually what it was doing was probably maybe something even more meaningful than it was for me. It was helping her process some difficult aspect of her life. And it's challenging, to say, is it my responsibility as a route setter to think that far? I choose to, because understanding people, I feel, helps me do a better job in my route setting. I don't think it's an obligation. And athletic empathy is rooted in that, creating an environment and to sort of sort through that. Another iconic character is, this is Max, again, not his real picture and not his real name, but many gyms in the world have a Max, the guy who makes a big fuss. He climbs very low to moderate grade. He comes in and makes a big fuss, screams like Adam Ondra on his warm-up boulders, and kind of bothers people with questions, always wants to be engaging, and kind of is living the life of the climber, but at the same time isn't that great a climber, and sort of is in the margin of the community in a way, puts himself in that. But the Max that I knew and got to know later, when I found out the things that were happening in his life, it made a lot of sense. He had a very hard life, a father in hospital, had to work a lot, and climbing again was a way for him to manage those things. And it affected me, knowing this and setting boulders, knowing that they would bring him joy. I judged them and I took decisions differently. And I was more compassionate, I think, with how I made decisions in my process. And I think the boulders I set were better for it. So, athletic empathy is an unfinished idea, and it's much more connected to how climbing can be something social, because it is. Climbing gyms have communities, have people, affect the world. And I want route setting to be a way to share my passion for climbing, the way I wanted to give value to people's lives, but not necessarily in a symmetrical way to what I got out of it. Everybody's going to have their own adventure, their own emotions, their own connections to the sport. And as a setter, I don't want to judge them. I want to create as much opportunity for people to find their path into climbing and through life. And I think route setting is a great way to do that. So that is my little presentation on athletic empathy. I leave you with this last quote, and I'm gonna unshare my screen here and rejoin the group. I hope you all enjoyed that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was great. Thanks a ton for the presentation. Just quickly, before we get into the discussion, I'm going to go ahead and publish this poll real quick because I'm quite fascinated by the turnout, and I'm really grateful for everybody that's joined. We've had 200 people join for this first discussion, and considering nobody knows what is coming of it, I think that's awesome. So thanks for everybody that's joined from all around the world. I'm going to try to publish the next poll here as we move into the next section. Let's see. All right. There we go. Cool. Well, that was great. I'm excited to talk about this now. What I'd like to go ahead and do for everybody is have our panelists introduce each other briefly. Maybe Carrie, if you want to go first.
Thank you, Kaya, and also Tonde, that was a great presentation. Really enjoyed it. But thank you to Kaya for inviting me to this. My name is Carrie Cooper. I'm a physical therapist in Salt Lake City, Utah. I work mainly with climbers. As a PT, I was working during the US Nationals season as well as on the World Cup circuit this last year, which I miss. That amazing experience. But something that you don't know about me is that I was a gymnastics coach. I was a gymnast. I taught movement I taught dance and Pilates for 20 years to large groups. And what I love about my job right now is that I do get to work with individuals and see individual movement needs and patterns and injury and try to help work with that, which is kind of along the same lines as sort of that design thinking. And yeah, I really appreciate this discussion.
That's great. And you're a climber too.
Oh, I'm a climber.
Cool, thanks, Carrie. Natasha, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Natasha Barnes. I'm a chiropractor, physiotherapist. I'm also a climbing coach and a strength coach. And my mission is really to educate and empower climbers to build resiliency through strength and through movement and smart climbing programs. So I help climbers overcome injury and I help them get strong. And I'm based in the Bay Area, so San Francisco and Oakland. And yeah, I'm also a climber. And I've been a competitive climber as well in the past. So I've done lots of climbing competitions, World Cups and things like that as well.
Thanks.
Last but not least, Mr. Justen.
Hello, my name is Justen Sjong. Thanks, Kaya, for having me here. I'm honored and excited to be part of this initial group for this first webinar. I assume first of many. Currently, I oversee programs for programs and route setting for LCAP, which is 3 brands, Planet Granite, Earth Treks, and Movement. I've been a climbing coach for nearly 30 years, from athletes of all levels, from new to professional, young to adult. And I am a very avid climber. I love to track climb and sport climb. So I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you guys all for joining us. Well, what I'd like to do here is kind of get into a discussion amongst the 4 of you. one thing for everyone watching, when Tonde and I were planning this with the Kaya team, one thing that we wanted to try to do was get away from it being a route setting only conversation amongst route setters. I think it's very interesting to get different viewpoints in the industry. And being a route setter myself, I know it's very easy to get that tunnel vision of, oh, okay, it's just what route setters think. So we wanted to try to expand the conversation beyond the realm of just route setting. So hopefully everybody learned something new here from the perspectives of Carrie, Natasha, and Justen. I'm curious to know what you guys think in your perspective roles. Like, how does that relate to what you do on a day-to-day basis, and how can you apply athletic empathy to what you do for your clients and your customers?
If I may start. I had a clinic in a climbing gym, and there are definitely patterns. From my perspective, there are patterns to injury. So with a beginning climber, an intermediate climber, and an expert climber, they would come in and I could pretty much tell over a period of time, oh, it was the green route that you got injured on. This was the injury that happened on this route, or this is the injury that happened here. And it became something that was so predictable that it also became an opportunity for collaboration between myself and setters. Although at the time, I didn't really know how to bridge that gap in knowledge. So I'm curious to know, from a route setting perspective, are you interested in hearing from the people in your community who are maybe not to invoke fear and say that, oh, we can't do these moves because these cause injury, because, you know, we're all different. And I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are.
I think it's a great question. For me, I think the wonder of climbing is how wide the movement spectrum is. You know, there's a lot of sports where the movement or mobility of the body is kind of restricted to certain types of moves. In climbing, it's incredibly wide. And so we end up doing, you know, pretty terrible things to our body at times. Knees, fingers, elbows, shoulders get put in really difficult positions. And the history of climbing has proven, we've seen people do absolutely insane movements and push to like the extreme of things. So it's possible to do it. The trick is when those people who succeeded found a successful path to get there. And I believe if we know how to collaborate well and create really clear paths so that the body can build up in a progressive way, fingers get stronger as we grow in skill and we don't jump through boxes, we can get people to have more happiness and satisfaction in their climbing performance without getting injured. And it's something that I say a lot. I think if you're a professional skateboarder, I think it's par for the course that you have to get injured and break bones to get better at your job. It's almost impossible to imagine it otherwise. I don't believe that's true for climbing. I think it is possible to have a successful career in climbing and get strong without getting injured, you know, provided we follow a few rules that people like you and Natasha have been shouting at us for years, and we're like, yeah, you know. And I think getting route setters to understand those ideas better could be really valuable, and to understand in this grade, doing a movement that puts this much torque on a shoulder, the majority of people won't be ready for it, and it's therefore a bad idea. So I hope athletic empathy can be that bridge to create that connection. I think that would be amazing.
I think that this is a really interesting discussion to have, Tonde, because this is something that as someone who works with climbers rehabbing injuries, I try to incorporate in when I work with climbers. And there's something that as professionals we're talking about in our industry right now called the emergent biopsychosocial model, which not only looks at the biology of a climber, whoever the human that you're looking at. You know, you're not just a shoulder, you're not just a labral tear. Someone's experience of pain is a lot more complicated than biology. And we have to take that into consideration when we're working with humans, because we're working with humans, not bodies. And so, you know, someone's thoughts about their injury or their body or their pain, someone's expectations of, you know, the injury or their experience with you as a practitioner, someone's beliefs about pain, you have to take into consideration, or beliefs about their injury.
Yep.
Their experiences with injury before. Of course, we're taking into consideration their biology still, but we're incorporating and folding in all these other things into that as well, because it can change someone's experience with an injury. And like what you're talking about with athletic empathy is there's a lot of parallels between that and the biopsychosocial model when it comes to rehab. So I think that's a really interesting discussion to be having, because we have to look at the whole picture of someone and not just like the route or not just the shoulder.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. And maybe Justin, I've begun coaching later in my career as a setter. And one of the reasons I did start coaching is because I was learning, absorbing information about athletes in different ways. Maybe, I don't know, does athletic empathy resonate with you as a coach?
Oh, it definitely resonates with me. I feel like I was able to be successful as a coach because I was easily able to empathize technically, mentally, and physically what they were trying to overcome and experience. So your definition, I really resonate with that premise.
Mm-hmm.
I also love how much you have influenced the setting community on being more empathetic to all users. You've made a huge impact. How I would challenge you, I guess, with, I feel like there's a huge emphasis on a physical empathy, and less on, and a little bit of the technical, but how do we get more of maybe the emotional? Because I feel like there's a lot of, my experience as a coach, I see a lot of people rub their shoulders after a move, and I see this and I watch the behavior and I go, is there something wrong with your shoulder? And they, no. And they don't bring the connection to, like, maybe I'm a little too tired to keep trying that. And I guess I love the conversation, but I would love, personally as a coach, I would love there to be less emphasis on always getting stronger, but maybe branch out and, like, let's have a conversation about what is better. Better and stronger aren't necessarily the same. And if you're always trying to get stronger, that is about, it's more of a zero-sum game. I succeeded or I failed.
Yep.
Where better is about mastery and nuance, and I can still succeed, but do I still have more to learn? So I would just love, like, how can we get our route setters to connect more on all three branches of kind of climbing, is at least the three branches that I see is like the technical, mental, and physical.
I mean, in a way, I almost think that route setting is an amazing channel for that. Many of us who've been setting in competitions have come to this strange realization that the hardest boulders don't create the hardest challenges. You know, there's another tool that I authored called the risk intensity complexity system, which basically the idea is to understand that something can be difficult not just because it's physically hard, but it's hard in another way. It's hard because it challenges you mentally. The foot looks too hard to stand on. It just looks too hard. If somebody just tells you, don't think about it, stand on it, you're fine, then you can stand on it. But because you get in your own way of like, oh, this is weird, and you know, so, and I think that's really interesting. And in a way, this is why I'm so passionate about climbing as a social sport, because it has this really complex layering to, you know, to the goals that people want to reach. They can't skip those boxes. They have to face those fears, and they have to understand themselves, you know. So, you know, in a very unique way, we can't bypass it with just the physical aspect. Being strong can only get you so far. And the reality, I think maybe Carrie and Natasha, you can confirm this, when we do try and bypass too much through the strength route, you end up injured. or you end up in some sort of a dead end in terms of performance. Actually, it's true from a coaching perspective as well.
They set up the foothold thing, because the number one, the highest incidence of injury is ankle sprains and fractures. So in new climbers who, for example, if they're in the bouldering gym and they don't know their surroundings, so they don't know where the floor is. If you get off, they don't know when they fall, if they're 6 inches, if they're 2 feet, if they're 3++. So like for a beginning person, if you have like really good handholds, but the feet look really hard, or they don't know quite how to do it, but they're low, so that they learn how to accept the movement, and then also learn their surroundings. But it's kind of controlled, because really our hands are very smart.
Yeah.
That brings up something that I think I mentioned to you before about something called constraints-led approach to learning, which is basically what climbing is, or what route setting could be. It's a hands-off approach to learning movement by manipulating like certain constraints within the environment to get someone to do something that you want them to do. So like what Carrie was saying, manipulating the footholds at the bottom where it's safe because you want climbers to get comfortable using their feet, or setting up, you know, a climb a certain way because you want to like sort of like force a movement or force something to happen, or even just force the learner to challenge a learner to find their own strategy within a climb. And that's constraints-based learning. And we use that in rehab, we use that in coaching. You guys are doing that in route setting. And something that I've actually noticed at our gyms, at the Touchstone gyms, is like when you go to the gym, oftentimes like a V0 or V1 or even a V2 is like a jug ladder, you know, it's just like a jug ladder, and you're climbing up to the top, and you're not really getting anything out of that. And I've noticed that the route setters at our gym are starting to get more creative with movement on easier climbs. So they'll set like really interesting moves with volumes or different holds that actually challenge someone to learn like a movement instead of just climbing like a jug ladder to the top of the wall, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's really I think the how rich the language is in terms of movement at each level, the absolute beginners, and it doesn't have to be extremely narrow. It doesn't have to be simple. It just has to be adapted to that individual. And that's kind of the idea of athletic empathy, is understanding who your audience is and how much you can share with them appropriately so that they have a good time, they learn something, they don't get injured. And an interesting thing about athletic empathy is it goes both ways. We're talking a lot about, you know, beginners, but I'm not and never was a World Cup climber. And yet I had a very successful career as a World Cup setter. And it came from my ability to understand what they could do. The men's group, the women's group, or this youth climbers group. And just as long as I can understand that and make a clear and healthy connection with what my ability is, I can't hold this, but they can. I can do this easily, but they can't. And that's where I think much more interesting things can happen in terms of route setting. It also allows for route setters to progress more in their craft.
So we got a lot of good questions coming in, and I'd like to get to some of them. This one in particular is interesting to me because we talk about females in the setting world, and we all know that there are very few. So maybe Carrie and Natasha, for you guys, I'm curious. Danielle says, how is empathetic setting possible when most setters are white males with strength egos and women feel pressured to set like men? And I know you guys aren't setters directly, but I'm curious, in your experience, like, can you relate to that? Like, have you noticed in the gym that all the setters are white males and they're setting these burly problems? Like, are they emphasizing with the actual clientele that are coming into the gym and climbing?
I've been a route setter before for like 6 years. So not like a competition route setter or anything, but just at a commercial gym. And I've definitely felt the pressure to set like a dude, I guess. Like I felt like I didn't want to make climbs that were too scrunchy because people would complain, or like use holds that were too crimpy and small. So I would set like a lot of really big moves, and actually people would come up to me and be like, dude, your routes are really reachy. And I'm like, I'm 5'2" and I can reach it. It's not reachy. Like, but I would be setting like, you know, to my limit basically. And I thought that was really funny. And like, I think it was because I was trying to set like the other guys at the gym, you know? But I think personally in my experience, I've definitely seen that changing a little bit in the climbing gyms. Like I've seen a wide variety of climbing, of setting from men and women. And actually the Touchstone has been hosting like a women's climbing competition every year called Women Up, where they only have female route setters or female identifying route setters setting the climbs. And some of those climbs can be like, I guess we're like stereotyping, but some of the climbs are surprisingly burly and big moves and like very powerful and like feels like male route setting or whatever. But you know, there's everything in between as well. So I think, you know, as people start to set more and talk about this stuff more, I think people are becoming aware of, you know, setting for different styles for different people. And it's not always like burly, crazy climbing necessarily. That's just what I've noticed.
I think that, gosh, so many things to say about that. I'm 5'1", I have 0 ape, but I in my youth, I loved to climb burly. I loved roof climbs. I loved big moves. Like I think it's a special experience to climb at the extent of your reach. Like it feels really good to kind of hit those kind of, your limits as far as like length and strength and tension. I think that I don't like climbs that are meant for short people that are really like techie and small. Those have their place. I definitely, I don't climb like a short person, I guess, because I have big hands.
Yeah.
You know, I do want to get into that like short person versus tall person climbing. I think that, Natasha, you're totally right. I've noticed that the setting has definitely changed in the last few years. And in fact, I climb at the front climbing club here, and their setters will invite people to come and try out the climbs and just kind of forerun, like a little bit of forerun, like, how does this fit you? What did you think of this? Like, do you like this move? And so they are taking into account like the style differences between people. And I'm totally 100% on board with more female setters. And I think having this conversation, saying that it's okay for women to set how women want to set and have maybe some more articulated movements and maybe just a little bit more nuanced, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be straight, you know, boom, boom, boom. It can be kind of,
Yeah, that's always been a very important topic to me in my previous roles as a head setter or as the chief of a comp. I think the value of the female perspective leads, you know, to more diverse results, whether you're in a gym or you're in a comp. This kind of leads me to my next question, Tonde, which Pete asked, which is, I'd love to know your thoughts on the importance of female route setters setting women's competitions specifically with the context of athletic empathy. So I think maybe what he's trying to ask is it going to be different if an all-female setting crew is setting a competition?
I mean, probably, and probably in just as good and bad ways as having an all-male crew. I've struggled with this idea for a long time, and I think we have to break it down into different parts. There's one part where the history of climbing gyms and the culture that we've been through has led us to a place where a majority of the route setters are male and generally white, but that is dependent on the country you're in, because but I would say male is the key component, and that is problematic. Independently of that, I think especially in climbing, if I look at how performance is happening outside, like on rock, I want to say, I've been quoted saying this, a good route setter, like a good climber, is genderless. It's about what you're able to do with your skill and your ability and so I think the effort we have to make now is to create, for me, the best thing is diversity. It's not about having all women or all men. It's about having different types of climbers who can understand a larger group. And generally that will happen in the best way if it's a mixed group, mixed culture, mixed genders, mixed levels. And so I think that is what is encouraging. The more homogenous you make things, the more homogenous the output will be. So there's different ideas happening. I'm in support of obviously trying to push the balance back towards having more women, which means having women-specific events is healthy. But where I want to be is equality, diversity and equality, where we collaborate on this, and a woman can be a chief of a group where there's a majority of men, but also some women, and there's a beginner setter who has less experience, but can still contribute something. And all of those things have value in a different way. And our work process can harness the richness of that diversity to produce climbing that is as rich and broad as the climbing we see outside. So I support, encourage women to become setters. A good setter isn't necessarily one thing or another, and a good setter for a certain situation is the person who has the skills and understanding to understand that particular group.
Justen, you talked about earlier more the emotional side of the journey than the physical side of the journey. How does that work on such a big scale with so many gyms? Like, how do you take those concepts and spread them across, you have gyms across the entire country. Like, I'm just curious to know, like, what you guys' thought process is for that.
Well, my thought process I have this dream, and I'm hoping that Kaya can help us get there, which is I would love that our users could plug in what kind of an experience they are looking for, and that they could search the gym for the product and it could curate the emotional experience for the day. So if I wanted to have a physical burly experience for the day, I could search and it would come up with a checklist and a grade parameter. Or if I wanted to do a tic-tac-toe, or if I wanted to work on a certain skill set. So that is sort of my dream, is to be able to have a team of route setters that can create and curate a facility that can accommodate so many different experiences, and that the route setting team had the ability to almost put tags, educated tags, that could create some sort of a searchable experience. But then the crux is, I think we all have to have hard conversations about kind of defining what are these things. Like, what is good route setting in a sense to me is having a climb that has, or I would say a great climb to me has beta. Beta to me means it has different ways of solving it. Where there was, and I think we're getting away from it, was like, no, this is how I wanted you to solve it. Mm-hmm. Now it's like, oh yeah, you could do it that way, or you could do it this way. And that creates community, because now we can have a conversation about, this is my beta. Oh, and I saw so-and-so did it this way. And now there's all these different possible solutions. But emotion, I guess you brought up a lot there, and I just spewed a lot. But I just would love to be able to be in a certain mood and be able to plug in what kind of an experience I want, and to curate it and know which facility to go to on that given day for my particular mood. Yeah, that's what I would love.
Man, that's interesting. I love that. I think we all can agree over the last like 5 or 10 years, route setting has come a long way from what it used to be.
Thank God.
When I started route setting, I route set for myself. I went in and I put up this really cool boulder and I climbed it by myself, and then I went home and I didn't get paid or anything. And I think that's, especially from what you, Carrie and Natasha, have said as well in your own experiences, like route setting is taking a step in the right direction. And, thanks to conversations that you started, Tonde, like, people are starting to think a little bit more outside the box. And it's, even for me, like only in the last couple of years did I go into the gym and realize I need to stop thinking about what I want to set. I need to start thinking about what my customers want to climb.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's cool. I mean, I think grand visions are great. And, hopefully you guys are able to achieve that vision through Kaya.
I hope so.
Yeah, I definitely think it's going to help.
Tonde, I have a question here for you. This is interesting. I'm trying to empathize with a new setter. If you're a new setter, should you focus on learning the basics of setting before focusing on understanding athletic empathy?
I mean, I want to say no, you learn them at the same time. You understand that in this process that is required to build a climb, there is, because I think athletic empathy is just a small tool within the whole toolbox that route setters have. And it's a space, it's a tool to ask questions. It doesn't mean it gives you the right answer. It gives you a spectrum from which you still can choose how you're going to do something. I will set for competitions and I'll look at a given group. I'll be like, okay, these guys are in, they're coming into semis. I look at what has happened in qualifiers. They did a really good job. And I feel like they're strong and they're going to want to bear down, and I'm going to give them exactly the opposite of what they want. I don't have to, comply, or I still have space to make choices. It just broadens the range of possibilities that I can choose. So I think I'm really concerned with this idea of how we teach route setting, and how route setting is a bridge that sort of encompasses everything that exists and we learned from rock climbing, and there's a connection there, but it's not, and it tries to sort of focus it into how we rebuild the experience and the richness of what's possible outside. Just fun and light, hard and weird, tweaky and powerful, simple and straightforward, all the different flavors. And I think connecting the technical with a real understanding of what it is I'm trying to achieve, like Justen said, on an emotional level, like why can't we factor that information just on top of the basic techniques, I think would add a lot to getting route setters who then have a broader range when they get to a few years of experience of what they can output.
Cool, great. Okay, so quickly, we've hit our hour mark, which seems like it only took 10 minutes. We did a second poll while we were all talking. I'm going to share the results. I think everybody in the webinar can see the results, but the question was, have you heard of athletic empathy before? And we have a wide variety of answers, some yes, some no, which is cool. Since it's 12, I'd like to give everybody attending, the option to say goodbye. And if people need to cut away, thanks for being here. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the 4 of you joining as well. However, if you guys want to keep chatting for a bit, I'm super psyched. We do have some other questions that we can go through for a bit. For those of you watching, I mentioned at the beginning, we will try to post unanswered questions on the Kaya website at a later date. So if your question didn't get answered, sorry, there's 100 questions coming through and I'm doing my best to manage all of them. So
yeah, thanks for the interest.
Yeah. How you guys feeling? You want to answer a couple more questions? You want to talk a little more? Anything on your mind? Like, are you itching to think to get something out, or no? Okay.
I mean, so much to say. It's like, it's kind of a dangerous thing where I feel like conversation could go on for hours. So I think it's a nice opportunity maybe to take some questions from people.
Okay.
And
cool. Let me pull up the Q&A here. Let's see what I can find.
Maybe I think a majority of the people in here are route setters, and maybe Jackie's question around, I can't remember how he formulated it. Do you have it pulled up?
Yeah, let me see. So,
Essentially about, go ahead.
yeah, Jackie's question was, I'm curious to understand more about what is for me one keyword to build an inspiring and productive environment, how to deal with the dilemma between this behavior and the fact to forget everything but me and myself when it turns to high performance.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to address that one because, you know, with ideas like athletic empathy and other tools in conversation that I'm sort of inviting other actors of the gym to participate in the conversation around what the climbing experience should be. I also, you know, I love the craft of route setting. I love the artistry in it, and I'm very passionate and like to disappear into the bubble of it. I don't see a contradiction between the two. I think it is very important. I think the best route setters are the ones who have a very personal style and who really can dig deep and go into that bubble and pull out movements and ideas that, you know, surprise us. And I don't want athletic empathy to be like a tool where it's like everything has to be consensus and everything has to be for everybody. And it's about opening channels. And once those channels are open, as a group, the setters or in the gym or in the community, we have a conversation about what's missing, what we have too much of, and this extra step, which I think it is the responsibility of route setters or maybe even gyms to always bring innovation, you know, novelty and surprise and freshness. And I think that idea is cool. And I still see that as an important role for the route setters. So while our job is getting more complicated and involving more different things, I still think, you know, route setters should at the right moment go into that bubble and be very personal and just go into what they feel is, you know, most extremely their style or their preference. Or I think there is good in doing that. And then they'll do it with more understanding of how it's going to impact the community or the world around them or the round of competition. So that's why I thought it was a really interesting idea. I want to build on route setting, not level it or transform it.
Yeah. Okay, I got one more question for you, route setting related, because I don't want to keep carrying Natasha and Justen here. Just, you know, I actually have a really good question. I think that we can end it on after that for all of us. So this next question is from Charlie. When fellow setters are unaware or resistant to the idea of athletic empathy, what exercises or lessons do you use to help explain the concept?
I guess the challenging, well, hang on. First of all, there are two other route setters in the room, both Justen and Natasha. And I also, you know, I want to leave opportunity for them to say things on this. I want to say it's maybe just about, there's an aspect of professionalizing route setting and sort of being more serious and more understanding in the approach, what it means to be a route setter in a climbing gym today. And it's different than what it meant some years ago. And that means for us letting go of certain things or letting other people in, or, you know, having discussions about emotions, which we're talking about predominantly male people in Western culture, you know, the connection or relationship around how we talk about or express emotions is, I think it's easy to say that it's not necessarily the most natural thing for that particular group. So making that more of a professional, natural component, being able to talk about my feelings as a route setter, as a climber, as a person, you know, because it has an impact because of the creative element of route setting. So there's a culture shift that needs to happen. And I think education is one of those channels, conversation. And I think route setters are equal to it because they want to do more. They have that excitement and desire always to push things. So it's challenging, you know, but essentially it means getting people to open up, and emotional intelligence has to grow in route setting. Maybe that's the the one-liner answer to the question. I think emotional intelligence has to be a more prevalent skill that allows people access and communication around what really matters in the climbing.
So many people have home walls right now and are setting for themselves. Like, I wonder what they're choosing to set for themselves. And maybe that's helping them to understand what they prefer.
Mm-hmm.
They can make comments at the gym.
Yeah.
Probably also creating empathy towards the setters.
Yeah, we're
starting to realize how challenging it really is. How they just make things very laddery-like, and they're like, how do I make that movement? Oh, it's because they have all those fancy tools and they have more holds than I have.
Yep.
Feel for
Tonde,
for all of us.
going back to what you were saying about just having this conversation and having this culture shift, I don't know if you remember this, but I've sat with you before at the Boston Rock Gym just for fun.
I remember.
I can't remember like what exactly happened, but it was one of the first times where I was forced to think about not myself when I was setting a climb, like what I would want to do, or specifically like what kind of hold I wanted to use for a particular like movement I wanted to set. And I think it was something where like you convinced me to change a hold because the hold wasn't comfortable or something like that for the user. Like I was using like a weird hold that I just liked because it was the same color as the other holds or something like that.
Yeah.
And I liked the way it looked, but like the way that the experience would have been slightly uncomfortable. And it was like one of the first times where a route setter who had more experience than me had that conversation with me. And like I made this like, it was like an epiphany, like, oh yeah, like this isn't about like how the route looks or how I feel about it. It's like what's going to happen when someone else climbs this. And it's just about you like just bringing it up, and not, it wasn't like a bad experience or anything. It was just a conversation that we were having, and we were all sitting together, and that was just one of the first times I actually like considered that in my own route setting.
You know what's funny is that athletic empathy was not on my radar at the time. I was just setting, I guess that was just part of the way that I set. And it's really interesting. It's like the roots were already there in my process, and just later it formalized into this idea that I now try and teach and share with people. So it's cool to hear. At least I was on the right track at some point.
Okay, cool. One more question I think I'd love to hear from everybody. This is kind of like a more broad-based question, and I think we've touched on it a little bit maybe in the initial discussion, but I think it can be a good way to kind of wrap up the concept and topic today. It's from David, and the question is, how does athletic empathy inform what each of you do for others in climbing, whether you're a coach or you're a trainer or you're an educator? But also, how does it affect your own personal journey within the sport?
Maybe I'll let somebody else begin.
How does athletic empathy affect our own journey in the sport? I think just being aware of like how, not only like just climbing and movement, but being aware of like how certain experiences make you feel in the gym, or for me, like how certain competitions, like how I felt about the route setting or my performance there, or like the example that I gave when I was setting with Tonde, like how that impacted me as a climber and as a route setter, just having that experience with him. I guess that's athletic empathy in a way, and how it's just been applied whether or not I knew that term to my own experience.
Cool.
I would say currently I am experiencing it through age. As a younger athlete, I felt like I could do a lot. I was more flexible, I was stronger, I had the ability to recover quicker. I could throw myself at things endlessly. Now that I'm aging, I'm not able to rotate my shoulders the same way. I can't lift my feet. I am all too often throwing a knee up and trying to knee mantle because I can't get the damn foot up. So I have a lot more empathy towards aging athletes where I grab things and I know what to do here, but I can't do it anymore. I wish the route centers would allow a little bit more creative ways without cleaning everything off. So I would say my empathy is really toward currently through aging and as an aging athlete. The struggles
cool.
of I see holds and I'm like, oh, that is huge. I'm gonna be able to recover. And I grab it and I'm like, that is not as big as I remember it used to feeling. And yeah, I would say that's where I am with the empathy part, is sort of connecting the dots that way. Where that strength component, it's not always there.
I guess as like a rehab professional, I can use my own experience with injury when I'm working with like a climber. Like I remember spraining my ankle years and years ago. And before that, I just had like no fear. I would get on high balls, probably put myself in situations that were actually probably dangerous. But like, you know, it was no fear. And then after I sprained my ankle, I was like afraid to do like even just normal climbing. And even just like the thought of falling or jumping off was like really scary. And it took a little while for me to get over that. And I think if I hadn't had that experience, then working with climbers like who are expressing those feelings, like maybe I would have been like, hey, you're injured, your ankle's injured, just go for it. Like, I don't know why you're so scared. Like, just do it. But I understand like going through that experience, like why you would have some fear around that. And I also understand how to grade someone's exposure back to that activity in a way that that's non-threatening to them. And I think if I hadn't had experiences like that before, I maybe would not have understood that or empathized with that.
So I am right now a beginning climber again because I had right knee ACL and lateral meniscus root repair. Because of the root repair, I had to be in a straight leg brace, non-weight bearing 4 weeks. So this was prior to quarantine. So then throw that on top and I'm like, I want to climb. But the experience is different. So given that I had the opportunity to go into PT, and I'm not trying to throw PT under the bus here, but they really didn't have any climbing specific, like thinking about range of motion and strength necessary for me to eventually at that like 5-month mark return to sport. And so I have deconstructed climbing from the lower extremity standpoint down to like, what do I need right now? What are the super basics? And then how do I build on that? And then again, how do I get into that like dynamic movement? And so when I get to touch rock again, it's not going to be about how hard I climb. It's going to be about like feeling my feet and like feeling how I move. And I think after having this experience, seeing people, I mean, I've gotten to work with people who are post-op before, but it just really reinforces that thought that even if you have had large success in your climbing or in your sport, there will be moments where it's okay to take a step back. Like, it's okay, like you got injured, like it's okay to feel, to approach climbing in a different way. And it doesn't always have to be one thing. I love that there's this emotional component of climbing and that you're starting to address that in the app. So people like me can go into the gym and be like, oh, I need to flow.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, I guess I've gone on at length about my relationship with emotional athletic empathy and the emotion around it. I can say along this path, which has been long to get to this definition and this process and turning it into a tool for route setters, it's changed me as a person. And I think maybe the most exciting part for me about athletic empathy is because climbing changed so much in my life. The idea that I can create climbing that's rich enough to reflect what climbing is indoors, and that could change somebody else's life. It's the, it's kind of the conclusion to all of my root setting courses is, why do I do this? Why is it such a big deal? Why am I so passionate about it? And that's the reason. And that's why I'm so interested in these tools that are more sophisticated and more complicated. And it's led me into coaching. It's led me into teaching. So exchanging, being here today with all these wonderful people who I can't thank enough for the conversation. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks guys. I think that's a good spot to end it at. I just wanted to follow up at the end here first by thanking all of you wonderful people for joining. This has been awesome. Tonde, thanks for your presentation. That was great. I love that you laughed at your daughter when she fell over. For all of you guys that have come and watched and stuck through, thanks so much for coming and being a part of this first event. We're super psyched that as many people turned out as they did. Hopefully you guys all took something away from this, and maybe you have something to think about as, your country, your gym starts to open back up with this crazy situation we've all been dealing with. We'll be posting this somewhere on the Kaya website at a later date so that everyone can go back and review and have access to it. And then we'll try to get a Q&A up as well for any questions that we weren't able to answer. So
yeah,
thank you guys so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye everyone. Thanks for tuning in.